call tonight's regular meeting of council to order. Recommendation that the regular meeting of council be suspended and that the committee of the whole meeting be convened. Moved by Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Cunningham. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Call tonight's committee of the whole meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the committee of the whole meeting of September 20th, 2021 be adopted as circulated. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Adey. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Any questions from the public? Ms. Miller? Yep.
We have received one email from Larry Golden of 2nd Avenue West in Prince Rupert, and his comments are as follows. Council should investigate and report back to the public on Rupert's rental vacancies and rental rates at this time, with the background being that on September the 3rd, Northern View article quotes the rental advocate as saying less than 1% vacancy rate and combined with the astronomical rental costs. On my walk arounds, I see many empty rooms in multifamily buildings. True, the empty apartments across from City Hall on 3rd Avenue is closed to repair due to water damage. When can we expect those apartments to reopen? I would further suggest a housing committee of council be set up and it reports back monthly to open council meetings. Larry Golden.
Thank you. We'll be discussing council's housing strategy tonight on the regular agenda. In particular, number 11 of the 15 recommendations or 13 recommendations is about housing needs assessment. So we can chat about that item there. Okay, see no other questions. Motion to adjourn and reconvene the regular council meeting. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, second by Councillor Niche. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of September 20th, 2021 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Adey, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3A, recommendation the minutes of the special council meeting of August 23rd, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Randhawa. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Item 3B, recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting of August 23rd, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Niche. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. And item 3C, recommendation of the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting of August 23rd, 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councillor Adey, seconded by Councillor Niche. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. First up, we have a report from our Director of Operations regarding the policy resolution of local service areas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Thank you. The recommendation is that Council approve the local area service policy as presented in the report. So the report is that Council directed staff to review a new local area service tax policy as one way to complete lane extensions. Through a local area service, property owners who want neighborhood improvements like a lane extension can petition Council and ask the city to undertake the work. A local area service project can be initiated either by a petition or by the Council. The cost of providing the service is recovered through a local area service tax bylaw placed on all of the property owners in the area. Whether the proposed local area service is initiated by a property owner or by the Council, the property owners can support or oppose the initiative. An owner of a property who would like to petition, sorry, we're having some feedback here. Okay. An owner of a property who would like to petition for a local area service must submit a request showing support for the petition. To get the project approved by Council, the petition must be signed in favor by at least half of the property owners, representing at least half of the assessed value of the properties benefiting. However, when Council proposes an initiative, the city must complete the petition with all of the owners with the same benefits. Cost for local area services are shared between the city and the abutting owners as laid out in the policy that's provided. And once the project costs are known, the individual property owner's share is determined and added to their property tax roll. Cost shared local improvements, charges are paid through property taxes, either in a single payment or as an annual installment for the duration of between 5 and 20 years as decided by council. In conclusion, it's recommended that council approve the local area service policy as presented, and as they come forward, we bring them to council to develop the tax bylaw associated with that. Thank you.
Thank you. So recommendation that council approve the local area service policy as presented. Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by. I'll second it. Okay, seconded by Councillor Murrow. Discussion. Councillor Niche, then Councillor Adie, then Councillor Cunningham.
Richard, I was just hoping you could maybe answer this question. So, this kind of all came about when we were dealing with a specific project there on 7th. Someone is using a lane, or, it's technically a road, I believe, on paper, but it's never been developed. And so my question would be, now in a situation like that, and I'm sure you know which one I'm talking about right now, if currently there is actually, someone that's using that lane and probably someone on the other side that's using it also. So right now, if that person applied for this local improvement, would it be now just those two houses that basically have access to it right now? Would they be the two houses that would be asked to participate in this? I'm just trying to figure out what the level of participation is, because if, let's just say it's only them two, and then say someone comes along in the future and they want that lane to go just a little bit further because they want to access their house. So does that person now take on some of the costs that the first two had taken on? So I'm just kind of looking for a little clarification on that.
That's an excellent question. I'll have to get back to you on that. So right now, when a petition comes forward, it is 50% of the benefiting party, or with 50% of the property value. So if there's two benefiting properties at the moment that will use that lane, then they both have to commit to it. If there is a new petition coming forward, then they will likely have to get permission from. Well, I'll have to get back to you on that, because I want to make sure that the people that have participated in the first portion of it aren't what their obligations are on the second half of it. So I'll get back to council on that.
Yeah, I just feel that, what could end up happening is that, the first person on the lane develops the lane at their cost, and then, because it only impacts them, and then the next person says, well, the road's already there, I want to do my little portion, and they end up paying very little in comparison to the first person. So there has to be a way to take some of the cost away from that first person who did the initial investment, and put it to the second person who is now kind of piggybacking off that. So I felt that was, other than that, I felt that it's a good policy. It's just that I think we need to just define it a little bit more as to, who's actually impacted. Like, if there's two people using that lane now, do those both people have to do it? And using that 7th Avenue one, why this came up as an example.
Yeah.
Councillor Adie. Oh, go ahead, Richard.
I was just going to say I will get back to council on that information.
Thank you. Councillor Adie.
A related question, looking at the same subsection. I can imagine a situation where, let's say there are 5 property owners, and 3 of them want something to happen and 2 of them don't. If I'm reading it correctly, then the 2 that are opposed would be faced with the burden of paying for something that they don't support. I'm wondering whether that's the case, first of all, or whether they can opt out, and secondly, would they have any recourse in terms of compensation?
The policy is written such that is the case, that they would take on that burden as if they were of the minority part in the petition. And at this point, there isn't anything written about opting out of the policy. So if a petition is brought forward and it is successful, then everyone benefiting from that improvement would pay for that improvement.
Okay. That gives me a lot to think about. I did have one other question. That was how you arrived at the percentage of share between the city and the owners, and whether that was based on other policies elsewhere, and also why the difference, why some 75% and others 100% to the owners.
I looked at about 6 other communities, and they were all relatively the same with those breakdowns. So we used examples from other communities to develop our percentages.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cunningham.
Okay, although this is a pretty good policy, I have a couple problems with it. One is, in this particular case, that brought this to the forefront, that lane's been there for years. It was just fell into disrepair because the city wasn't maintaining it. And there's other lanes around the city in the same situation. It was a lane developed by the city and used for years. And then when we went through rough times, the city stopped maintaining them and they've fallen into disrepair. Now, if somebody wants to start using that lane, which this one's been used constantly for years and years, and it's still being used daily. Now this person's being penalized because they've been using something the city didn't maintain, and if they want to put in their new grads, they now have to pay the city to upgrade a lane that was there and not maintained by the city. So I think in this particular 7th Avenue one, it's a rather unique case. We haven't maintained a city infrastructure, and now we're asking a resident to come forward and pay for the fact that we didn't keep it up. And I just don't think that's right. There's got to be some exceptions to this rule, and this might be one of them. There's other lanes that and you're aware of some of them, Richard, where people have taken it upon themselves to upgrade the lane, and then have gotten into trouble with the city because they actually did what the city should have done, and they've benefited from upgrading the lane to proper use. And the city's benefited by not having to do the job. And in this particular case, it's a well-used little piece of property. It's only like 100 feet long, if that. And then it turns in. And then, it's been there for a long time. I talked to residents that have lived there for 40, 50 years, and they said that piece of lane's been there for that length of time as far as they can maintain. So, to me, it's just not right that we're going to penalize somebody for something that we haven't maintained.
Mr. Buchan, did you want to say something?
I would defer first to Richard, and then I may add, if I may.
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor. So the concern is the ongoing maintenance implications associated with lane development. So there's the idea that you develop a lane, it just becomes part of our infrastructure. Well, that unfortunately, that just brings more and more maintenance on us. Plus, the development of a lane, if it's not done to city standards, has poor drainage and other concerns associated with it. So, we shouldn't be allowing these developments to happen that aren't budgeted for and ongoing maintenance budgeted for. So, with this policy, it would be approved infrastructure improvements to the proper spec and standard, with then the assurance and understanding that there would be maintenance associated with them. So my concern is that if this lane is not part of our roster of infrastructure on paper, and if new garages and things are built there, there's an expectation of a certain level of service there, and if we can't provide that level of service because of our budget constraints, then I think there's a disconnect on what's able to happen there. So what we're trying to do is just make sure that all the infrastructure is put in approved with proper drainage and maintenance associated with it for the long term.
So
Buchan?
over a period of time when the city hasn't maintained a lane that was actually there, and it was possibly put in by the city, no one knows, because some of these lanes are 30, 40, 50 years old. You know, I know of one lane that was well used that went between Smithers and I forget the other side of the road, and you're aware of it too because it was well used. People used to use it all the time, and then in the 90s it was blocked off because the city couldn't maintain it anymore. But that was a well-used lane that was put in there by the city. They just blocked it off and went into disrepair. And then when one of the citizens on that did some work, then it came to forefront. But you know, I just think in this one particular case, this person's being penalized, where they're going to have to come up with a lot of cost because I can't see the people beside. They don't have access to their backyard. They park on the road. And this goes into just one garage and then a house maybe on 7th. But to me, I can't support it the way it is.
Mr. Buchan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the points that are being made, and I think Richard has articulated, good reasons why we would want to perhaps use the local improvement area in the instance of the 7th Avenue project. However, the 7th Avenue project is not what's before council right now. What's before council is a policy for local improvements. Council can adopt this policy and it can turn around and say that it's going to do improvements all on its own without using that policy. That policy gives residents an option to petition the city, and it gives the city an option to petition the residents for a local improvement. And then ultimately it's the city's decision whether or not to go ahead. So I would want the council to know that in voting for this policy, it's not saying that particular owner must abide by that policy. It still has discretion about any improvements on 7th Avenue. That's a separate discussion. So if the policy is good and stands on its own, then you can adopt the policy and then have that separate debate about whether or not the city invests solely in that laneway improvement.
See, there's no mechanism in here to say that something wasn't maintained by the city should be exempt from this. And I know that once you give the city a policy in place where they can start charging residents for something and they don't have to do it, it's 9 out of 10 times it's going to come back and bite the resident in the butt, because there's just, the city has an option now. We can charge you instead of doing it ourselves. And in this particular case, and a couple of others in town here, where we just stopped maintaining the lanes because, one, we didn't have the staff or the budget to do it. And now if somebody wants to do something on that lane, they're going to have to come forward and pay for it and put it on their taxes. It's going to be an extra burden to the resident. And I just, if there was something built in there that said that existed, Mr. Buchan, then I'd agree with it. But right now, this one particular one is what brought this to the forefront. And it's, whether, I know we're not discussing that variance, but this is what brought it to the forefront. And this is the one particular example that I don't think is right.
And Councilor Kennedy, I have to understand the reason why this has come about, though, is that, the whole town collapsed in the early 2000s and lots of things weren't maintained moving forward. Now, if people want to wait for the city to prioritize laneways, well, they'll be waiting till well after 2030, because with Watson Island costs and the water treatment costs and wastewater treatment costs and RCMP costs, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of city priorities going into those major infrastructures that these other areas aren't the top priority for city spending. The reason why this has come about is to give an option to get smaller projects an opportunity to get funded quickly so that people can see improvements in their areas. And this isn't something that's uncommon. We're not some unique case here. I mean, in fact, we're one of the only municipalities that doesn't have local service area improvements. I mean, our staff went out and researched a variety of other communities that have these policies in place. If we don't have this in place, then if that's the case, then everyone will be waiting for their laneways to be redone, because they're not part of our major infrastructure program. We already have priorities as council. A $70 million water project is our top priority. And phase 2 coming to completion, and phase 3 hopefully beginning next year. And if it's that versus doing it all at the same time, then we're going to have to choose our priorities. That's why we're allocating resources wisely and effectively based on the priorities that we've already set up. But local service area, the whole point of it is to give residents options on little nimble projects that need the ability to move quickly. And as Mr. Buchan's saying, we're talking about the policy today and not talking specifically about a project. I personally don't want to talk about that project in this case, because council could choose, if they want to, when that comes back, to go ahead and do that. But for now, this is about a policy to take care of long-term issues based on a community that did collapse, on a variety of little projects all over this community that we are just not going to get to. I mean, we just doubled the roads budget, 2 years ago, to $1.1 million from $400,000. And that road budget was $400,000 since 1998, not even including inflation. So you have a situation now where for the first time in almost 2 decades, we increased the roads budget by double. And look at how much work that's able to do in the community. The truth is, we need to get the roads budget now from 1.1 million, probably up to $4 million, which means we need to significantly increase our revenue to get to that level of standard so that we can really start tackling some of these bigger problems. But even then, the laneways aren't going to be part of that program, because you know how much pavement $1.1 million is getting us. It's an improvement, but it needs to be even more. So this gives the residents options that they otherwise wouldn't have. And we have a policy then that we can work on if residents are choosing to want to go in that direction. Now, if there are sticky problems, like you're saying in the past, I think we can have a discussion about the cost on that and how much it would cost, and if it's something that we would do or not do. But I don't think this is about that project. This is about a policy that gives options to fix infrastructure that we'd otherwise wouldn't get to in a very long time, because we have over $100 million of other priorities right now, well over $100 million of other priorities right now to fix key infrastructure like water and RCMP replacement that we just are mandated to do. And we have to pick our priorities. So this is allowing, I think, in the next decade, a whole bunch of other little projects to be enabled as well, on top of those big projects to be enabled. That gives us that flexibility. I think that's what we're discussing here. So I think it's clear we could have a discussion about that project that you're talking about that did spark this, but that doesn't mean what this is going to be employed upon them. It just means that this is a policy that, based on the problem we've seen, can come out and we can address. That's my couple cents on that. So, Councillor Niche.
Yeah, I mean, I think, generally speaking, like not using that project the only reason why I brought that project up as an example is just to say, hey, if 2 houses are accessing it, and then all of a sudden 6 other houses want to use that same access point now, and they're now going to benefit from what the first people put in. That's my only kind of point that I'm trying to make with this. It's got nothing to do with previous lanes that were built. That's not the point I'm trying to get across. So the reality is, I look at it as the policy for the most part is a good start, but I don't think we are ready to adopt this policy, because I think there needs to be a few more questions answered before, or maybe a few tweaks. And so I would like to put forward a motion to table it until we can maybe answer some more questions.
Seconded by
I'll second it.
Councillor Cunningham. Okay. There's no discussion, so is there anyone opposed? Okay. The motion's tabled. Staff, I think you're going to have to take another look at the policy. And I think, the concerns around the opting out and if others want to join in any other discussions, I'm sure council can bring that forward to you. And then we'll rediscuss this policy when that's prepared. Okay?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And thanks for your work on that. I know how tough these policies are to do to get them right. So let's get it right for sure.
No problem. Thank you.
And
Hey,
I
next-
say
oh.
too. It's a good policy. I like it. I just, a few little quirks here I'd like to see it protected. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, next. Report from our Chief Financial Officer regarding the July 2021 financial variance report.
Hi, thank you. Okay, so the July variance report is what I need to pull up. Pardon me. There we go. All right, so the operating and utility revenues and expenses continue to perform as expected compared to budget. The reopening of services previously put on hold due to COVID has resulted in an increase in revenues, particularly the airport ferry. However, it has been slow over the course of July. As communicated during the budget season, the Safe Restart grant funds are eligible to address shortfalls related to the pandemic. Capital costs are well underway by the end of July. Costs expected to come in later in the summer through the fall. The dam and landfill cell are proceeding and are anticipated to be completed within the calendar year. Some aspects of the landfill project respecting the leachate pond were impacted due to changing Ministry of Environment requirements. However, the overall capital budget for this fund is expected to remain close when actuals are realized. This concludes my report.
Great, thank you very much. We'll move into your next report regarding the Lac Melam's Holdings Revitalization Tax Exemption Agreement.
Thank you. Council passed bylaw number 3466/2020 that seeks to incentivize development in the downtown core by way of a municipal property tax exemption for eligible properties. As part of that bylaw, council must authorize the exemption after determining whether the applicant meets the requirements set out in the aforementioned bylaw. Staff have received the attached application and have determined it meets the eligibility requirements stipulated in the bylaw with respect to the redevelopment of an existing building. There is no cost associated with authorizing this exemption, save the opportunity cost foregone from the exemption of municipal taxes for 5 years on the non-market change, if any, that would be levied should there be an increase in assessment of the property. This is in keeping with the purpose of the revitalization exemption program. Council is asked to authorize a municipal property tax exemption for 5 years for Lac Melam's Holdings.
Okay, recommendation that Mayor and Council authorize a municipal property tax exemption for 5 years for Lac Melam's Holdings, subject to the fulfillment of the conditions set out in the agreement. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Randhawa. Discussion. I guess this will be the first proponent that we have coming forward to formally make the application then, eh? Ms. Bobbin?
That is correct.
Great. Discussion?
It's just nice to see that, we've encouraged this type of development in the downtown. It's not right in the core, it's off to one end of it, but hopefully other people will take advantage of this. And I see there's a few other places downtown that are starting to renovate and that. Next, I hope to see some development in the empty lots, and that would be encouraging considering we've taken this initiative to give tax breaks for development. Thank you.
Councillor Niche.
Yeah, I was just going to say, basically along the same lines as it's great to see the first one coming in, and I hope to see a lot more of these, agreements coming forward for where people are taking advantage of it and starting to do our downtown development.
I anticipate we'll be seeing a lot more of these coming shortly. Other comments? Okay, hearing none. Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next we have a report from iPlan regarding the housing actions. Go ahead, Mr. Bucket.
I need to excuse myself.
Okay, Councillor Niche will be recused from this discussion. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As council will recall, there was a workshop that council had on June 15th of this year to develop a number of actions for housing in Prince Rupert. Council endorsed the list of actions that are in the table included within the report and asked for a report on resources. So this report basically speaks to the timing and the resources for each of the proposed housing actions. There is an associated memo regarding item number 5 with secondary suite utility billing. So based on that report, if council wanted to hold off or defer or take out item number 5, I would say that you would recommend the second recommendation. You would simply add excluding item 5 at the end of recommendation number 2. The first recommendation is to waive the fees for all residential rezoning, development permit, and building permit applications for 1 year effective October 1st, 2021 to October 1st, 2022. This recommendation is necessary because there has to be a policy resolution to actually waive those fees. And the second recommendation is to ratify the proposed housing actions.
Great, thank you very much. So maybe some comments from council. Councilor Adey.
Yeah, I'm supportive of the vast majority of these, but I do agree that number 5 is carries with it some complexity. As my understanding is that the utility funds are self-contained, and so if one was to remove the burden of paying from one taxpayer, it would end up falling in the laps of others. And that doesn't mean that I necessarily oppose it, but I do think that we need to look in a little more detail about that. So I'm going to, if I can, according to the rules, if I can suggest that we do indeed defer number 5, pending an opportunity for council to discuss that particular one further.
Other comments?
I would second that motion if Councillor Adey was willing to move it.
So just, okay, yeah, I think, well, the recommendation is council waive all fees for residential zoning, development permit, and building permit applications for 1 year effective October 1st, 2021 to October 1st, 2022, and that council approve the housing actions and resources listed in the report, deferring number 5 to a future discussion. So moved by Councillor Adey, second by Councillor Moreau, is that correct? Okay. Okay, so that motion's on the table, so we will, number 5 will require some more budget implications, and we'll have another discussion about that. But other comments about the other 12 actions that are on here?
Can I speak, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Thanks very much for your report, Mr. Buchan. I don't have any questions. I just want to commend you and city staff for your work on this file. And it is always, I think, worth mentioning that even though housing is a provincial jurisdiction, it's quite obvious that there is a role for the municipality to play, particularly with the incredibly low vacancy rates we're seeing and the substantive increase in real estate values as well. So I think this is a very timely report. I'm very supportive of all the actions as mentioned, and I'm also very much looking forward to knocking off number 3 on the list, which is the rent eviction bylaw later tonight.
Other comments? Councillor Randall.
Yes, Mr. I'd like to this will encourage people to renovations and a little bit solving housing problem. I think this year
Thank you. Other comments? Okay, it's a very comprehensive list, very action oriented. I think a lot of thought and care has gone into this. Thank you very much for that, Mr. Buchan. If there's not any other comments, anyone opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. We can get Councillor Niche back in the room. welcome back. Okay, moving on to another report from iPlan regarding the minor sign permit number 2112 with variance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The application is requesting a minor sign permit with a variance to section 10.12.0 to permit 4 attached wall signs in the form of poster frames, which can allow periodic replacements of the posters. This is before you as a variance because the bylaw as currently written doesn't allow attached wall signs. And I think that that's probably an oversight in the bylaw. So in addition to recommending approval of the minor sign permit, I'm also recommending that you direct staff to bring forward an amendment to the bylaw to allow attached wall signs as a permitted form of wall signage, the details of which that regulation could be discussed in the subsequent staff report.
Okay, so the recommendation is that council approve minor sign permit number 2112 with variance, and that council request staff to bring forward an amendment to bylaw number 3462 to include attached wall signs as a permitted form of wall sign. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Niche. Any discussion? Seeing none, anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, we have another report from iPlan regarding the DVP 2112 for 1343 Overlook Street.
I need to excuse myself from this one too also. Sorry.
Okay, we'll wait for that. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This application is for a variance to Prince Rupert's zoning bylaw section 5.2.0 for a proposed rear property line setback of 0.61 meters and for a stair assembly and 1.52 meters for a new deck and stairs in accordance with the attached plan schedules.
Okay, so the recommendation then is that council proceeds with the statutory notification process for development variance permit application DVP 2112. Moved by Councillor Adie, second by Councillor Cunningham. Any discussion? Okay, anybody opposed? Motion's carried. We can get Councillor Niche back in here. Okay, next we have a report from our corporate administrator, a letter of support request from the Jazz Production Association of BC. The recommendation that council direct staff to provide a letter of support to the Jazz Production Association of BC to support their application for a recovery grant to the BC government. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor Niche. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Anyone opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have a report from our Chief Financial Officer regarding the permissive property tax exemption amendment bylaw. The recommendation that council give forth and final reading to the permissive property tax exemption amendment bylaw number 3477/2021.
Thank you. Council has the authority to grant an exemption from municipal property taxes under Section 224 of the Community Charter. Since the permissive tax exemption bylaw was introduced in August, staff have undertaken notification in the paper. No inquiries or objections were received. There is no budget impact to adopting this bylaw, given all proposed amendments are for properties that were already exempt. For a permissive tax exemption bylaw to take effect for 2022, it must be adopted by October 31st.
Anybody moving the recommendation? Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Adie. Any discussion? Okay, anybody opposed? Motion's carried. Next, we have a report from iPlan regarding the business regulation and licensing renovation bylaw 3476/2021. Go ahead, Mr. Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The proposed bylaw would control eviction resulting from renovations. And this is one of the housing action goals that council has just ratified. The community charter enables the city to establish business regulations which discourage landlords from evicting tenants for building renovations without making arrangements for each tenant to continue their tenancy at the same rent during and after the renovations. I would note that the province has recently amended the Residential Tenancy Act to improve protections for tenants facing possible evictions. This bylaw does not replace that, but it complements that recent amendment to the Act.
Great, thank you. Question from council? Councillor Niche, Councillor 80.
I was having to read through it there, and the one part I had a few questions about is part 3, which is number 10 and 11 sort of is where I'm looking to start. It says this part does not apply to a single detached dwelling unit. So would that mean that basically any duplex or anything beyond that would have to get a license in order to rent, or is it just? I just like a little clarification on that one.
Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yep.
So basically, no. This simply doesn't apply to single detached dwelling units. I don't believe that you need a license to rent for a duplex. But I will, if I may, if council proceeds with this bylaw, I'd like to clarify that and report back when it's reconsidered.
Yeah, I just when I was reading through that, just the way it says that it does not apply to a single detached dwelling unit, to me that only signifies that it only applies to a single family home, with no suite or anything else in it. So I'd kind of like that clarified, and then I did a little bit of research in the Residency Tenancy Act, and it did say that, like, in another part, which was I think 44. So 44, it discusses about having to give people, an option to live, like, say if it was an apartment, if you were, renovating another apartment, and you wanted to move them into a different one, and then having to put them back into that apartment at the same rate. And I did read part in the Tenancy Act, and it says that that's basically for 5 units where they would have to offer a new tenancy agreement. But in this policy, I didn't note that, and I could be wrong, that it's for under 5 units that wouldn't apply. And the reason why I bring that up is because, I would hate this policy to kind of work in the opposite of, its intention. And I look at this and say, I don't want people to, I don't want people to get renovated or reno-evicted from their place because somebody wants to put some flooring in or do whatever. But the flip side of the coin is that, and I'll use a particular property as an example that I looked at recently, as an investment, and currently had half a dozen or 8 units or something in there that were paying like $400 a month. But the building requires very extensive renovations, and for someone to actually purchase that building and do extensive renovations on it to make it, livable housing, because right now it's currently probably not very livable, but unfortunately there's people living in it, and I don't want to see that sort of housing. I want to see things get fixed. But if someone has to buy something and offer that apartment back to them for the same $400, but is expected to spend, $500,000 renovating, I feel that what might end up happening is buildings will get left. They won't get renovated. They won't get sold, and they'll fall down before they get any work done to them. So I'm a little bit, as much as I think most of the stuff in the policy is great, I do feel that, we live in a town where we have 10 feet of rain a year, and our buildings take a beating. And there's a lot of buildings in this town that I've looked at, including houses, that, if you were forced to, if it was just a 2 or 3 unit place and you were forced to, you wanted to fix it up and you're forced to rent it back to that person for a low amount of money, then you're not going to want to invest that money into the units, or potentially no one's going to want to buy it to do that, because there's no money in it. So there are going to, these buildings will end up staying, in poor condition and fail. So when I read that part in the Residency Tenancy Act about 5 units, and I see that, as kind of a happy medium. If you've got 5 units and you want to fix them up, okay, you've got one empty one, you move someone over, you fix one, and you go from there. So I think there could be maybe a little bit more discussion about that, as far as who that affects, which was 44I is the part that I was referring to. So, and you may have more for me.
Mr. Buchan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would note that that's the concern over the property eventually falling down if nothing was put into it is dealt with to some degree with Part 4, which establishes minimum maintenance standards. So there's 2 parts of this bylaw: is making sure that there is a minimum standard of maintenance, and that's a pretty robust section. I'd also note that if the owner gets an exemption from the province, an order from through the Residential Tenancy Act for improvements and eviction, then this bylaw does not apply. So there is a provision for them through the province to perhaps look at those improvements. But I do hear the concern. And part of this is a question that I don't have an answer to, which is how much of the stock in Prince Rupert for rentals is in buildings that are less than 5 units, and is there a concern with rent evictions in those types of buildings? And if the answer is there's not really a concern with rent evictions in those numbers of buildings, then council could tailor this to apply to basically 5 or more unit buildings.
Do you want to follow up, Councillor Niche?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I mean, I do feel that this is a needed policy, and it's not that I don't disagree with a lot in there. I just feel that we have to be careful that it's not gonna work in reverse and cause us to have buildings that aren't maintained, or they're not able to sell them and then get fixed because of certain stipulations. Where the one that I was reading about was the fact that you would have to basically fix a unit and let somebody move back into it, which it's not that I disagree with it. It's just that I almost wonder if there could be a way we could trigger it through the building permit process, and if a particular amount of money is spent, or through a report somehow, that you could kind of control that a bit more. Because like I said, if someone bought something for $500,000 and they have to spend $500,000 on it, how are they expected to charge $400 rent still? So if someone buys it and doesn't do a thing to it, and they still want to charge, or they want to jack the rent up, that's where I have a problem. If they want to, if they're trying to, rent evict somebody just in order to charge more rent, then obviously that's where the issue is, and that's what we obviously want to stop. I just don't want to see it, affect people's ability to want to. I mean, right now, I've looked at a few things recently, and unfortunately, the values are so high because there isn't much stock. And so, in order to buy something, it either has to be in good shape to rent it at the current rate, or you have to put money into it. And if you got to put money into it, you have to be able to justify, being able to charge that rent. So it's just an observation.
Thanks, Councillor Niche. Councillor Adie.
Yeah, I had a couple of questions, and you might have already answered the one that I was going to start with, and that was around the wording in Section 10 does not apply to single detached dwelling units. So if I can just kind of put this in the context of a real circumstance, if I own another home and I am renting it out to somebody, does this policy not apply if I want to renovate that home to a degree that would require the occupant to not be there?
It would not apply.
Okay. And then the other layer was around if I've got a secondary suite downstairs in the home that I own and I'm renting it, does it apply in that circumstance?
It would not apply in that circumstance because secondary suites are deemed to be a use within a single detached unit.
Yeah. Having said that, I must confess I'm in neither of those positions. I have a second question though, and that is around how tight the housing market is here and the rental market is here. Let's suppose that somebody has a building that has 10 tenants and they want to do this and all of the relevant conditions apply, but they're in a position where they need to provide alternative housing for 10 tenants and there isn't any. What then? What happens then?
Well, some of this might be answered through an application with the residential tenancy board. So I don't have an answer for you. The way this is, if it's up to Prince Rupert, they would not be able to do that unless there's alternative housing provided for the interim. But there is an option for them to get approvals direct from the province, in which case, if they get that, Prince Rupert's no longer involved.
So just 1 second, Councillor Cunningham, just to be clear. So basically, the Residential Tenancy Act and the provincial government's guidelines basically are the rules of the land, and our policy would be kind of a secondary kind of catchment policy for things that don't necessarily apply at the provincial level. But if they get their approvals at that level, a lot of our policies won't apply. Is that correct?
That's correct. Our lawyer that reviewed this said this is a complement. It's not redundant. And you know, basically, if the province gives permission, then the bylaw doesn't apply.
Okay, so this is kind of like protections in case type of thing.
Yeah.
Got it. Councillor Cunningham.
Okay, why are we exempting a single dwelling detached? Because there's a lot of houses for rent in town here that shouldn't be rented, and they're single detached.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, that's a fine question. We took the bylaw that the New Westminster did as the model, and then modified it to take out a number of areas which, in the lawyer's opinion, perhaps weren't as defensible. Now, the New Westminster's bylaw did go to court and was successful. And the grounds that it was challenged, it was upheld. But let's say, put it this way, there could be other grounds, and we've removed those grounds to make sure that this, does stand up in case there is another challenge. So that's how we got to this, and they used the single detached dwelling as the one exemption. So we did too, assuming that there was some wisdom within that. It is council discretion whether or not to exclude that or to actually increase the exclusion.
Councillor Niche.
Yeah, it's back to what I first raised there. I mean, kind of my question is the way that number 10 is written is what is the definition of a single detached dwelling? Like, is that a house with a suite? Is that a duplex? Is that, and that's kind of the question I had was, what are we calling, and the licensing on 11, which refers back to number 10, is, are we turning everything into a licensing for rental? And that's kind of the only question that I really, want answered.
So I do think I can answer that now, but I'll clarify it if my at the next meeting if my answer is wrong. So a single family detached dwelling is defined by our zoning bylaw, and that it may include a secondary suite.
Okay.
So this would apply to all other forms of residential.
So duplex.
Yes.
Okay.
Other questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Council Morrow.
I'm wondering if it would be
Councilor
appropriate
Randall.
to ask Mr. Buchan, rather than change the bylaw as he's written it. I'd be really curious in getting a report back on what the potential implications would be of not exempting single-family homes, because I think it's worth exploring in a bit more detail. Where I think we all know Prince Rupert has a pretty high proportion of single-family homes built around, wartime, that are owned as investment properties and not as primary residences. And I think that a higher number than most other small communities of our size in the north. So I would be curious about what the implications of that exemption would be.
Would that be a major undertaking, Mr. Buchan?
I was pausing because I'm not quite sure how I would do that. Saying if you didn't have that exemption, if somebody wanted and has a rental that's a single family dwelling, and they did a major renovation with the intent of evicting so they can raise rents, if that's a major part, an important part of Prince Rupert's housing, and if that's a concern, then you should take that out, if we're allowed to under the Residential Tenancy Act. So I can check the Residential Tenancy Act and see if this is consistent with that, whether or not that's a mirroring an exemption. And no, that would not be a major undertaking to put a report back. I don't think it'll be a very long report.
Okay. Councillor Renhala.
Just like a quick question, like, is this like common practice for all cities, or like we are one of the first ones in this one?
We would be, go ahead, Mr. Buchan, yeah.
Well, I can't tell you if it's common, but we're certainly not the first. Others are doing, and the New Westminster's bylaw is being fairly commonly regarded as the model.
Okay, thank you.
So based on, okay, go ahead, Councillor Adie.
I was just going to say that we are recommending giving first and second reading, so obviously it's coming back to us anyway. And I think that time frame allows for some exploration of some of these questions, so that when it does come back, we're going to have a little more information there. And I say that in the context of my opinion that I'm very much in support of the intent of this. I think that this is a provision that I think in general is really badly needed in the rental market. So I'm supportive of the principle of going forward with this.
I was just going to ask, actually, Mr. Buchan, if it's appropriate for us to do first and second reading and still make amendments at third.
Absolutely.
Okay, well then I would make a recommendation that council give first and second reading to the Business Regulation and Licensing Renovation Bylaw number 3476/2021. Moved by Councillor Adie, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Any further discussion? You're pretty clear on the feedback, Mr. Buchan, about what council wants to see at the third?
Thank you. Yes.
Great, awesome, and great work on this, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's well done, and I believe it's well needed.
Thank you.
Well, believe it or not, you're up next again. For the zoning bylaw numbers 3462/2021, and amendment bylaw number 3478/2021.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do believe it. So this proposed rezoning is to increase the permitted density from 2 units to 4 dwelling units for the property located at 712 and 714 McKay Street. The proposal is not anticipated to negatively impact the neighborhood. In fact, there is a fourplex operating on the property right now. The intent of this is to legalize that operation. So the recommendation is to proceed with consideration of the bylaw, giving first and second readings, and then proceeding to a public hearing. The one condition that we're recommending is that the properties comprise of 2 separate lots, and they should be consolidated prior to final reading.
Thank you. So recommendation that council give first and second reading to the City of Prince Rupert zoning bylaw number 3462 2021, amendment bylaw number 3478 2021, and that council proceed to the public hearing for the amendment bylaw number 3478 2021, and that council require the applicant to consolidate the lots prior to final reading.
So moved.
Moved by Councilor Roundhouse, seconded by Councilor Niche. Any discussion? Anybody opposed? Motion's carried. And finally, we have the City of Prince Rupert zoning bylaw number 3462 2021, amendment bylaw number 3475 2021. Go ahead, Mr. Buchan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As council is aware, this bylaw has been to a public hearing, and there was quite a number of questions raised during the public hearing, and council resolved to have a subsequent report done to address some of these concerns. In the process of that, we have received another mini report here from the applicant's engineer addressing the traffic issues and outlining a proposal to deal with some concerns regarding sightlines and speed in that area. So there is a number of other things in addition to traffic, environmental question about whether or not taxes would go up, servicing, is the property serviced, whether not a tree barrier would remain, how garbage and recycling would be handled, and whether or not the property is suitable. So this report endeavors to answer all of those questions. I will not go into each of those items, except for to say with respect to traffic, the engineer did conclude that the development does not make anything worse, does not have any negative impacts, and provided a number of recommendations to manage the traffic coming out. What is being proposed here with this technical memo in discussion with staff is the development of basically some bulbs at the intersection to allow for shorter crosswalk, to improve sight lines, and to delineate where parking would be. This is actually would be an improvement on the existing traffic situation in that location. This is proposed to be paid for through a local improvement area. So the city would do the work. It would go on to the taxes of that property, and it be paid back from that property over time.
Okay. I guess one request here is, given that what we heard at the last public hearing about information not becoming available to residents, I would appreciate if we can make the effort to make sure that this information gets into those who have raised concerns hands. So what I don't want is at the next public hearing, people to come and say they never had access to this information. And I don't want them to have to dig around in a council agenda to try to find a technical memo. So what I would request is if we could potentially extract this memo, put it on our city website, and then we have emails of individuals who are interested in this project, and make sure that they are given this directly, and that we accommodate that information. And I was also wanting to ask about how, at the next public hearing, what the plan would be to present this information so that people potentially could watch a presentation on the questions that they asked. Because obviously this is a technical memo that needs to be read or presented to the public, and ultimately that's up to the proponent usually to do that. So I want to just make sure that we're facilitating to make sure that this information is getting in the right hands and getting into the right people's eyes, so that at the next public hearing they're able to make an informed discussion with us on their concerns and whether they have or have not been addressed.
Mr. Mayor, we had turned our thoughts to that very point, and what we were proposing to do was to in the notification that goes out to the adjacent property owners per our bylaw, we were going to note that there was this report and provide a link to it so that they would receive it. And the proponent is also going to be arranging for a open house that afternoon in advance of the public hearing to again allow this to be addressed, and the proponent would also be reviewing this during their presentation at the public hearing.
Okay, is that a physical open house, like in person?
No, I think in keeping with the spirit of the new orders, that would be a virtual.
Okay, and that would be a link provided in the notification then in that for that as well?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just making sure as long as it's people have the notice that there's a link there, maybe on our city Facebook page, we can say this is where you access this. There's going to be another open house before the public hearing. Also the information about the public hearing. I think it's imprudent of us to make sure that we're overly communicative so that there is no confusion on where do you access this information, because what we heard from the last public hearing is that people didn't even get the notices for some reason. So I just want to make sure that we are going to do our due diligence to bring clarity.
Indeed.
Councilor Cunningham.
I was under the understanding it says restrict 12 units to senior housing to reduce parking demand. And I was under the understanding, I thought at the last presentation, there was going to be 20 units for seniors. It's always been 12?
Yes.
Okay. And one other thing was there was some discussion about moving the entrance from the top of the hill down to the bottom. I don't see that addressed in here.
Through the mayor, no, it's not addressed in here. It's not something that can be done where we understand. But there may be one or two items that we didn't address. That one I missed. I don't recall that one. I just didn't get that one. Sorry.
Well, it was brought up with the blind spot and things like that at the top of the hill. Mm-hmm. And that blind spot coming out of Edward is on Edwards. I can't see it. I don't know exactly where the entrance in and out is going to be, but if it's farther down the hill, there's more visibility for vehicles coming from both ways. And that was one concern brought up at it. And the other concern was parking on 11th, and I see install non-parking signs as recommended. But is that going to be on both sides of the road or just one side of the road?
Richard might be able to help me with answering that question. I'm not sure if they're on both sides of the road, but I can tell you with respect to the moving the driveway access, we can ask the proponent to include that question in their open house and address it during the public hearing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Other questions from council?
I just have a quick one, Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead.
Mr. Buchan, sorry to ask you to repeat yourself, but my internet was or my connectivity was a little bit spotty there. I missed what you had said about the proposed curb extensions. You said it was going to be paid for by the developers, but through what mechanism?
Paid for by the city, but put onto their property taxes. So the cost would be recovered over time through a frontage tax, basically.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none, the recommendations of council to proceed to public hearing. Moved by Councillor Adie, second by Councillor Niche. Any further discussion? I'll just say I just want to thank the staff for working with the proponent to get this information out. And I look forward to hearing more from the public at the next public hearing. And my understanding is that we're going to, based on the new orders from Northern Health, we're going to do that virtually. Is that correct, Mr. Buchan?
Yes.
Yeah, so one of the challenges we have now is that we're not allowed to have, we have to have a limit of indoor gatherings, and under legislation, we actually can't limit anyone's ability to participate in a public hearing. So what we don't want to be in a situation is having to turn people away from the door who can't, if we're at capacity. And so at this stage, what we've decided to do, I think, is to have a virtual public hearing. Now, anyone who's watching this with interest around this project, I would say most people probably have access to a computer or some sort of device that can connect to the public hearing. However, if you don't have that ability, we've arranged with the Prince Rupert Library to have a station available for anyone who wishes to come participate in the public hearing. So you'll actually be able to go to the library. They'll have a public computer there with a camera and a mic, and you can actually go use that computer to participate in the public hearing, just to ensure that everyone has access if you don't actually have appropriate technology at your house. So that will be available, and that'll all be part of the posting for the public hearing on October 4th. I think this is the best we can do given the current orders that are specific to Northern Health at this point. And we don't see those ending actually at this point. So I think those orders will continue probably through the fall, potentially even through the winter. So at this stage, I think that's the best we're going to be able to do to accommodate people's views. However, these reports will be available on the internet, and those notices will go to the households affected by the area. Those links will be provided in those notices. And then there'll be another open house where you're going to be able to actually talk to the developers again directly before the public hearing, and then also express your concerns again to council at the public hearing. And then once that public hearing has adjourned, council then will make a decision based on all the factors that we've gathered over this entire process. And once again, that council is legally obligated to keep an open mind about this project until such time as the public hearing has concluded, where we collect all that information. So I understand that there's a lot of passion around this, and we want to do our best to ensure that all voices are being heard and all the questions are being accommodated. We certainly heard that loud and clear at the public hearing. Okay, is there anything further? Okay, I'd entertain him, or sorry, it's getting late in my mind for right now, but anybody opposed? Or actually, Councillor Adie.
Sorry, I thought you were about to ask for a motion to adjourn, and I don't think we're quite there yet.
No, and that's why I stopped myself on. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to public hearing. Thank you very much, Mr. Buchan. Is there any reports or questions or inquiries from members of council? Councillor Adie.
Obviously, I had a reason for interjecting. I wanted to reflect on the fact that up until I think probably about a year ago, not often, but with some regularity, we would get a chance to talk to people from emergency services, whether that's the fire chief or paramedics or the RCMP. We haven't really done that for some time, and I'm wondering whether it would be appropriate to ask that we explore the possibility of renewing that. I think particularly in terms of my own interest, particularly the RCMP, I understand that there has been some transition there in terms of the sort of who's leading that department. So I'm not sure whether we're at a point yet where there is somebody that we can call in, but I think whether it's either in the in-camera meetings where there's a certain amount of detail we can go into, or a more general opportunity in a public meeting. I'd like to see us move forward with that.
Yeah, I think that can be done. We have an interim inspector right now, and the RCMP is in the process of recruiting and bringing forward applicants for the actual position, which has been, I think, within this year frame. But yeah, I'll work with the corporate administrator to establish something like that. That's no problem.
And just as an addendum, I don't mean to exclude fire and ambulance services. I see that as well. It was just that the RCMP were the ones that sparked my initial curiosity. Perhaps we can look at all three at some point.
Yeah, no problem. Any other members of council? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Renhauer, seconded by Councillor Adie. Anybody opposed? Meeting's adjourned. You guys have a great evening. We'll see you on October